One of the challenges I have with reading generally is just not having your smartphone be a distraction constantly. With notifications from all the many different apps that we have, and text messages and emails and so on, the smartphone becomes this constant nagging attention grabber on the side as you try to otherwise dive in to whatever it is that you're reading. And reading requires sitting in silence and quiet, and these little nagging distractions can completely pull you out of what is otherwise an experience of a totally different kind of world. Yet sometimes while we're reading, we want additional information. Maybe there's a word that we need to look up. Maybe there's a concept we want to dive deeper into. Instead of just going to the internet and then being bombarded by what may not even be the best source of information, it's really just going to be the information that is most clicked on or most pushed to the top on a search engine. Instead, maybe you want a more thorough view of any one concept that you're looking up. Maybe you want to have books handy that you can read as you're reading other books. You can jump to these other ones and they don't break your concentration. Instead, it's just diving even more into language, into words, into meaning and ideas, and the importance of those ideas. Here are some of my favorite reference books. What makes many of these my favorite is I don't just use them to look up an idea. The big additional benefit is often when you're searching for one concept in a reference book, you're going to be rummaging through a whole wide variety of other ideas, and you're going to be glancing at other words, other concepts, each of them kind of rising to the top and grabbing your attention and making you just fold into ideas from centuries ago. And it's just such a nice thing to have a book where every page is filled with something new to think about and ponder and question. And maybe it's just simple inspiration that makes these reference books so valuable. Genuinely, I think the thing that makes these books my favorite is I don't just use them when I have a specific idea in mind. Sometimes I just love being able to grab them off the shelf and just flip through the pages and just find something new. And there's always something new to find. There are so many, many conversations people have had in the past. There have been so many attempts to grasp the world and all its intricacies, and all of these are different ways of looking at things, different ways of feeling your way through ideas, and it's just nice to have access to that and to discover. That's really what these reference books offer. Constant discovery without the level of distraction that the internet or your smartphone would provide. The first one I'm going to show is a collection of volumes that I didn't know existed at all until I found them at a used bookstore. And as soon as I found it, it felt like such a perfect topic for a reference book to have. And that is this 5-volume dictionary of the history of ideas. Now, what this means is it's not a regular dictionary in the sense of you looking up a word and it gives you some of the etymology, the usage, and a rough definition of it. What this is these are a series of essays done by all sorts of writers in the academic world, and these are essays summarizing the evolution of a concept. So what I mean is, for instance, if you look at the very first one in these volumes, Abstraction, you will get a history of discussions around the idea of abstraction, from Plato's idea of forms, of there being perfectly defined elements in existence outside of the physical world, that the physical world is a mere mirror image of, to some of the later views of abstraction in mathematics, to abstraction in art, all of these ideas of how we've used abstraction through history. And so it is much more a history book of each of the ideas rather than just a dictionary. And every essay that I've skimmed through or read carefully in these volumes has been interesting. Every single one has brought me to other ways of thinking. You know, like when you read a big book of the history of Western philosophy or something like that, and it goes chronologically through the major figures, gives a little bit of bio, and then some of their major ideas, and then the influence that that brings with it. This book does that for every single entry. And it's like a rapid fire overview of some of the biggest concepts that we have. If you're thinking to yourself, for instance, what is the history of law or the idea of law, then you can just look up that entry in this book and you're just going to get this broad overview of precisely that concept. What is the history of despotism? What is the history of our idea of love? How we discussed love? So much of the book is just the conversations that we were having in the past about these ideas and how those conversations develop, because so much of our ideas is us developing with others, working this kind of back and forth. Hey, here's my point of view on this. Here's how I'm seeing this thing. And then someone follows up. Oh, okay. That differs from my perspective on this. Here's my perspective. Here's how I'm building off of what you said and or refuting some of what you said. And you get like summations of those ideas in this collection. So I really, really highly recommend you try to find the Dictionary of the History of Ideas. It's one of those collections that I think it's going to take a long time to get through, but I'm actually slowly making my way through almost every single entry, and it's been riveting the whole way through. I really think it's a great, great resource. And it's one of those things, again, I had no idea it existed until I just stumbled on it in a bookstore, and I was super excited to have done so. And then there is actually a follow-up to that collection, and this is going to be hard to hold up, but there is a version called the New Dictionary of the History of Ideas, and this is much bigger. It's separated into 6 total volumes, and this New Dictionary of the History of Ideas is entirely new. None of the entries, as far as I know, is repeated from the original Dictionary of the History of Ideas. However, with this one, in the entries that I've read, I noticed that it feels more like each entry is an author summarizing their point of view of that concept. So instead of the original Dictionary of the History of Ideas, where it's giving a chronological history of how we've discussed that idea, this one feels much more like here's the latest attempt to grasp this idea. And there's bits of history because, of course, in discussing whatever the latest version of an idea is, you're going to reference some of the prior ones. But it isn't as much of a straightforward chronological historical overview. Now, what's still useful about that is it ends up feeling like you're going to get some really novel ways of thinking about things in this book. And it's very literary theory-like in the sense that it's authors sometimes pontificating on an idea for a little while and just kind of seeing where it takes them. It's very interpretive in that way, in that it can't quite be tested or falsified in any significant way. But it's still interesting in its own kind of way. If you had to pick between the two, I actually feel that the better reference is the Dictionary of the History of Ideas, the original one. And then the New Dictionary of History of Ideas is more like a curiosity that you can stumble around in for a little while. It does feel quite different. One thing that's nice about the New Dictionary of the History of Ideas is there is some online entries that you can find if you just Google it. So just search it up a little bit and you'll probably find some of the entries I'm talking about. So you can kind of read through the various entries ahead of time before trying to buy the books. And then you can decide for yourself if it's written in the way that you want. The New Dictionary of History of Ideas isn't written as smoothly as the original one. It's much, much more academic in its jargon, which makes it a little bit harder to enjoy. But again, I like having just a bulk of these essays, just having these kinds of references. I just get curious about an idea and I think, oh, what is the general overview of this concept? And a lot of the concepts in this collection is totally different than what you find in the original Dictionary of the History of Ideas. And one of the best things is both collections end up being like a mix of different departments of education. You know, it's philosophy mixed with literary theory, mixed with history, mixed with aesthetics generally, mixed with law. You're going to get all sorts of academics writing about the ideas that they value all together and commenting on each other and some of the different ways of looking at these ideas. Like, how does an artist look at this one concept versus a scientist, for instance? And getting those kinds of comparisons is really unique, and it's hard to find entries like that online. It really is just only available in these kinds of books. So those are two reference works: the Dictionary of the History of Ideas, and then the new Dictionary of the History of Ideas, that I think might interest some of you if you just want to just sit and read for a while in your reference books. Now, another book that I happen to really like, and again, this is another for pretty much all of these reference books, I just sort of stumbled on them at a used bookstore and found that, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want. And so the next one is a lot like that. This is the Dictionary of Literary Terms and Literary Theory. Now, this might seem extremely opaque and particular to a certain profession, like if you're an English teacher or something. But what's actually really nice about this dictionary is it was originally written by one person, J.A. Cudden, and he wrote the whole thing as a dense summation of a lot of the literary concepts that were arising from the 60s and 70s and so on. And the fact that it was all originally written by one person gives it this personality in every single entry. And he was a very smooth writer through and through. So every entry that I open up, it feels like I'm talking to someone who is extremely passionate about literary concepts and who has an opinion about things. He's not just giving you what you would expect in a regular dictionary, which is just, here's the basic facts, here's the agreed upon overview of these ideas. Some of these entries feel like little mini essays that he's writing about some of the concepts that he finds most intriguing. And what's really great about this, and this is true of a lot of the reference books that I'm about to show you, is at the end of each of the entries, it also includes additional entries to then look at. So if there's any other concepts that relate to that central concept that you're currently looking at, you could just jump around. So it creates this spiderweb quality to reading the book, where you're initially looking in for one thing, and then it's just branching out and grabbing another concept. So now you're looking at that one, which then branches out to like 4 or 5 other concepts. So then you're looking at all of those. And it feels like a way of learning that is organically connecting the various ideas that you're curious about. And some of the entries are short, but many of them are just long enough to be engaging. And this edition that I have, this is like this is the 5th edition, so it's actually edited by M.A.R. Habib. And I want to mention that person because he prioritizes the entries that are going to matter the most, but he's an interesting character because he actually wrote his own book called A History of Literary Criticism and Theory. And this one is a great, if you just want to understand, like I said with the Norton Anthologies video that I did, if you just want to understand a lot of the more current ideas around gender and sexuality and race and things of that sort, a lot of it comes from literary or critical theory. So his book is a really, really nice way to just get a chronological history of those ideas. It's different than the Norton Anthology of Literary Theory, because that one is more like the primary sources, the essential essays that you would read for those ideas. But this one is just a broad overview, almost like a history of philosophy or something, gives you a broad overview. That's what this one does. And he's the editor of the Literary Terms and Literary Theory, and then he has this book. So I think they complement each other really nicely if you're really serious about trying to learn about some of these concepts. And it's one of those things where, I think I said this in my other video, it's not scientific in any kind of grounded way. It's very, very loose in its way of thinking. Often it's kind of just playing with language. Unfortunately, it has this feeling of trying to use literary analysis, which is about a constructed text, and trying to apply it to the world as if it's equally constructed. And what ends up happening is it's really just projecting many of your own aesthetic desires onto things. There's a kind of desire for things to be tangible and beautiful, or at least tangible in what you define as good. It's very moralistic in that way. So there is a bit of irritation when you go through some of these ideas, but these ideas are infectious nonetheless. So it's one of those things where maybe it's best to just try to understand them, at least to the best extent that you can, so that you're not just criticizing them from afar and throwing insults at people for thinking very differently than you. So this is a good book to have as well, The History of Literary Theory, alongside that reference book. And the next two that I want to show, I'm actually going to just put together because I don't think they're as good as the literary terms one. The literary terms one is so good because it's written with a kind of panache and personality. All of the entries are really, really entertaining to read. The next two give you a broad overview. You get to get all of those big concepts within the subjects that you want, but it's missing that personality, which is a big, big shame. So the next one is going to be the Dictionary of Philosophy and the Penguin Dictionary of Psychology. These are all Penguin, so they're all similarly sized and in line with each other. But the philosophy and psychology, the philosophy one is really just directly useful. It's not personable. It doesn't have a lot of variety in its syntax or style, but whenever there's a really complicated philosophical concept, it gives enough of a simplified view of that idea such that when you're reading a really heavily academic philosophical work that expects you to know a wide variety of the prior terms that had come before, this book just will give you a very quick summation of that idea, a much better summation than often what you'll find in an actual general dictionary, and a much shorter summation than what you'll find if you try to look up that same philosophical concept online. So it is really nice to just have a dictionary dedicated to philosophical concepts, and it's written by philosophers themselves, and sometimes what you'll get is the philosophers describe their own perspective on a concept because they were the ones who coined the concept, and so you'll get a few of those entries in there, and that's really very nice. It's like a very accurate view of what that concept is all about. And then the next one is the Penguin Dictionary of Psychology. Now this one, there's a huge caveat. This is the 4th edition, and I know that there's now a 5th edition of the DCM? I don't remember the exact letters, but the major book that psychologists rely upon that has the latest research and definitions for different kinds of conditions. So this one is slightly out of date, but it doesn't change the fact that if you just want to know, okay, what are these psychologists talking about when they describe certain kinds of pathologies, it will give you just a quick overview of those pathologies, at least as it was understood, even though it doesn't have the latest exact entries on those concepts. And again, the best value of a lot of these Penguin ones in particular is they're compact. You can just look at them very quickly. They're not going to suck you in quite the same way as the internet would. It allows you to not get distracted, but still just learn about what it is that you need to know about. And again, with all of these, they will point you to other words so it can kind of spiderweb out, just like the first one I told you about. Now, the next reference that I think is worth having, because it's just, this one is much more in line with actually being engaging in how it's written, is Sapphire's Political Dictionary. So William Sapphire began his career as a reporter, so he has that journalistic quality to his writing where it's very public facing. It understands how to present things in a fast, easy way to grasp, and he knows how to tell a story well when it's necessary to do so. And the whole book is super nice to have because it's very, very opinionated. He's giving all of these political concepts, but he's not giving it dry, and he's not giving it without his bias intact, but he makes his bias very clear, and he does seem to attempt to convey some of the different perspectives in a fair way while still giving you his overall point of view at the end of the day. And it's another one of those things. It's just like the first Penguin literary terms and literary theory one that I showed you, where it has this kind of deep personality to it because all of the entries are written by one person. So because William Sapphire wrote all of these entries, it just feels smooth and personable the whole way through. And he'll often tell stories, he'll quote people, he'll talk about historical events that relate to certain political concepts. So if you find yourself a political newbie, you're jumping into politics and you're seeing all of these different terms and all of these different ideological definitions for things. This is a really nice book just to get some of the stories behind a lot of those ideas, while at the same time getting a general summary of what these ideas are. So that's William Sapphire's Political Dictionary. And even if you disagree with his general politics, I think you have fun just jumping around in each of the entries. The next reference I want to show is more of a grab bag of theories. This is the Dictionary of Theories. What's useful about this one is a lot of the other reference books I've been showing have been more soft science oriented categories. So psychology, sociology, philosophy, things of that nature, politics. But this one has a lot more entries on scientific concepts and mathematic concepts and chemistry related concepts alongside philosophy and politics, and really just a broad general overview. So it's really nice having this one because it's very straightforward. It's very literal. It's not going to meander anywhere near as much as the other reference books, but it does still have that spiderweb quality because each of the entries will then point you to some of the other major concepts. And what I really like about how this one does it is I've noticed there's a consistent pointing to the contradictory ideas. So if you get one, for instance, it summarizes like an economic concept, the entries that it points you to will be some of the competing evaluations of that same information. So if one economic concept, for instance, is trying to explain data in one particular way, they will show you some of the competing ways to explain that same data. And it does that for a lot of these scientific theories or mathematical theories or philosophy theories. And it seems to do it a little bit better than some of the other reference books that I've been showing to you. So this one's really nice, but there's no personality to the entries. It's much more direct, but that actually might be a relief to some of you, especially when it comes to empirical scientific concepts. It's just giving you the facts, the rough, hard facts, and then you just kind of can jump off from there. So that is the Dictionary of Theories. And all of these are, again, just a joy to grab off of the bookshelf. I like to have them near the doorway when I come in. It's one of those things where if I just feel like I just want to chew on some ideas, I want something new in my head, I just grab it, open up a random page, and just see what I discover. And so often I'm discovering things that I really find interesting. So if you're like me and you just want to keep learning, you just have the ceaseless curiosity and you want to learn as much as possible, and maybe even you're going to use some of these concepts to then make you read other kinds of books. Oh, now I know this idea exists. Now I'm going to look up books related to that idea. I think these kinds of references are super useful for that. Another one that I think is worth mentioning, and this one might seem initially odd, is the Oxford American Writers Thesaurus. Now, what is so great about this thesaurus, I know you've seen thesauruses throughout your whole life, but this one goes out of its way to not just give the synonyms for words, but to really think carefully about those words' usage. The way that a lot of the diction that we can choose from has a certain kind of tone or implication tethered to it. And so it gives little tiny mini essays by different well-known authors. David Foster Wallace is in here. In some places, Brian Garner is in here. We have people like Zadie Smith is in here. So we get certain authors who obviously are so close to language in that it's their profession. They have to use language to write well. And they have little box, mini paragraph essays where they just give their thoughts on how those words are used, some of the strange complexities of using those words, some of the weird mix-ups, some of the ways that the words can be kind of tricky in their usage where you could definitely misuse them in an easy way. So this is the Oxford American Writers Thesaurus. Like it says in the title, it is for writers. It is for diving into words and then hearing other writers talk about words and how they use it. It's not just finding the synonyms or antonyms. It's really kind of swimming in the waves of how words connect to each other. And there's something really nice about this book. It's my favorite thesaurus that I found, and it's very nerdy and enjoyable. It just seems to love language, and that's really nice. The next reference book that I think is worth mentioning is Garner's Modern English Usage. Now, Brian Garner is actually made famous by a David Foster Wallace essay in which he sums up some of the prescriptivist versus descriptivist camps in dictionaries, which, as far as I understand, he exaggerated the problem. It's not quite as clear a boundary or divide as he had presented it. I think he presents it that way in order to just tell a good story, but it's a little bit fictionalized. But anyway, David Foster Wallace talked about that competition of those two camps in response to reviewing Garner's Modern English Usage book. And so this one is the 5th edition. And what this is it's a dictionary of how to use grammar, the rules of syntax, the rules of punctuation, the general rules that we follow when we are packing words together into sentences. And the thing that is really great about this book, there's a couple of things. One is he writes all of these entries so smoothly. He's such a fantastic writer, and he seems to have fun with thinking about the history of how our usage has shifted over time. He's not too restrictive about usage. He seems to understand that usage is an organic quality of language that's always shifting, and there's trends, there's fashions of usage. And so all of his entries have sections at the bottom of each entry where they sum up how much that usage has shifted. Is this one of those things where the usage is cemented in our culture, or is this one of those things where it seems like the usage is starting to shift over time away to a new trend, a new way of using certain words or certain syntax? And he's just someone who clearly loves language. A lot of the entries, you're going to learn so much more than you expect about how language has been used and why it's used the way that it's used. And it's written in such a way that, just like the other ones, you could just grab it off the shelf and enjoy yourself as you dive deeper into each of these entries. And that makes it worth having on any bookshelf. So this is Garner's Modern English Usage. Okay, the last one on this list of 10 reference books that I think are worth having is The Dictionary of Global Culture by Kwame Anthony Appiah and Henry Louis Gates Jr. Not by, but edited by, I should say. And this Dictionary of Global Culture is exactly what it sounds like. Who are the major figures? What are the major events? What are the religious concepts or mythological ideas that have persisted through time? What are some of the cultural touchstones that different nationalities throughout the world have? What is the general broad concepts that seem to repeat themselves across different cultures? This is what this dictionary is dedicated to. It's different than the philosophy and psychology and political dictionaries in that it's really just about more story-oriented ideas, more ideas of celebrity, more ideas of political figures rather than political ideas. It's going to be what are the things, the concepts that are traveling throughout the world, and ones that if you feel like I want to be a culturally literate person, if you're going to be cosmopolitan in your tastes, it tries to kind of sum up a lot of the main concepts that seem to fit that worldview, a worldly worldview. So that is the Dictionary of Global Culture. Now this one is an old copy that I have. I think this is the original first edition, but I know that there's new editions now. I'm not sure what's different about the new edition or new editions, so you should look into that for yourself to decide whether the new or cut entries are worth having for that edition. But this one I've browsed through far less than my other reference books. It actually used to be my dad's copy. So it's one I can't fully vouch for in terms of the language used or the style, which is hence why it's the last on this list, because I don't want to push it too heavily. But it is nice to just have these more broad concepts in a book. And it's one of those ones that I look forward to diving into more when it seems of best use. So that is the Dictionary of Global Culture. Also, there are 2 bonus entries that I want to add onto here, but they don't quite fit the list perfectly, so they're not included in the count. One entry is there's a series of anthologies called Art in Theory. The one that I own is from the year 1900 to 2000, and they have it for different centuries of theory of art and media. And they also have one about art in theory around the world, so like different views of different cultures um, in regards to art and media. Now, this one isn't really a reference book in the traditional sense. You're not going to be looking up entries on theory of art. What you get with this instead is it's an anthology of primary essays that had a strong influence on our understanding of art. And art is one of those things that I don't have a lot of grasp of a lot of the modern and contemporary art. I have a much better grasp of literature. But this anthology contains a lot of the essays that matter in regards to how we understand art or how people speak about art. And of course, when it comes to something like art, as subjective as that, there's a lot of pontificating. There's a lot of enforcing standards for their own sake rather than on the basis of something grounded per se. But it still can be interesting to at least understand what are people talking about when they reference art in the way that they do. And this resource and all of the other anthologies in this series might be of interest to some of you. So I just want to mention it real quick. One more bonus thing I want to mention. I can't vouch for it because I don't own it. It's one of those things that I've just seen every once in a while on Amazon and been a little bit curious about, but haven't committed myself to buying it. That is the Emotion Thesaurus. And it seems to be part of a series of a whole bunch of, like, they have negative traits and positive traits thesaurus. And it seems to just be a quick resource for writers. So, for instance, in the Emotion Thesaurus, if you're trying to communicate a certain feeling, it seems to have not synonyms for that feeling, but rather entries describing sort of actions that characters would have, or facial expressions, or ways of projecting that people would have when they have that emotion. It seems like just a very direct tool for writers. It doesn't seem to have entries explaining the concepts as far as I can tell. That's one of the reasons I haven't actually picked it up, is it seems far more to just be a list of different kinds of reactions to emotions or different ways of behaving. If anyone owns the Emotion Thesaurus and it actually is more than what I'm describing, let me know. It's one of those ones where it seems a little bit too... It doesn't seem as devoted to the language as I would like. It doesn't seem to like branch off beyond merely just giving you utilitarian entries. But if there's more to it that I just don't understand, just let me know. But that's the last little bonus reference book that I want to mention. And those are the 10 reference books that I think are worth having. So thanks for watching. I also have a video on Norton anthologies that I think are worth having. I also have a video on the 10 hard books that I look forward to read, but you don't have to. I'll have some more lists. I'm always thinking of different kinds of lists that I think are worth sharing. So if you like learning about different kinds of books, if you want some suggestions for books that are maybe a little bit more obscure, then subscribe to my channel. Leave me a comment if there's reference books that I missed. There's probably some really good stuff that I had no idea about. Like I said before, I had no idea about the Dictionary of the History of Ideas until I just stumbled on it in a bookstore. So please let me know if there's some other great reference books that are just packed with ideas that I might be interested in. Because I like being able to just grab off of my bookshelf and just discover a whole world of thinking. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you around when I can.